Back in business, Delegate Ward is available now. So Delegate Ward, would you present House Bill 5002?
Yes, and thank you, and my apologies to the chair and members of the committee. Yes, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, this is a bill that's been a long time coming. It's a bill that I have brought before the body year after year, and it's to codify the governor's executive order. And what has happened recently is that a disparity study was released, and so the governor has added some of the findings from that disparity study. And what this bill would establish, it establishes the women-owned and minority-owned businesses enhancement program. And I won't go all into the details. I'll just mention the things that it does. It also establishes a small business enhancement program. It establishes a division of procumbent enhancement, and the bill will require certified small business subcontracting plans. It will also require 50% subcontracting to certified small businesses. And what the bill will do, it increases the small purchase set-aside threshold and the micro business set-aside from $3,000 to $10,000. That's going to be the small purchase threshold for this bill. Those are the basics of this bill, and I understand that there are some amendments that have been made to the bill.
All right, are there any questions for the patron of the bill?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Bell.
I have a question, and I'm not sure if the patron or if Secretary Ball might be able to answer this, but on line 165, 166, it says the department shall develop guidance for determining whether a price is fair and reasonable. Can he comment on Secretary Ball or someone else about how long that's going to take? Because I think that's going to be a very critical piece to making this legislation work and not have delays in procurement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Delegate Ward.
Is Secretary Ball here?
Mr. Chairman.
Is Secretary Ball? All right, Secretary Ball, you want to take that question from Senator Bell?
Shall develop guidance for determining whether price is fair and reasonable. Can he comment?
Secretary, Chair Barker, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to defer on that. We've got some folks here from both SBSD and DGS, and I'm going to ask either Jennifer Mayton or Sandra Gill to speak to that, but we don't expect there to be holdups in determining what a fair and reasonable price is on that, if I'm referring to the correct section.
Mr. Secretary, it's lines 165, 166, the very ending of 165 and all of 166.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm here.
It's the line that says the department shall develop guidance for determining whether a price is fair and reasonable. And it's in section 1619.
Yes, sir. Oh, I see what you're saying. We are planning to do that if it's the will of this group to advance the bill, which we hope it will be. We will do that over the course of the summer, sir.
You will do that when?
During over the course of the summer. In other words, we will address this before the bill, if passed, would become effective July 1. We will do this over the course of the summer so that we have this ready to go.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Senator Mason.
Would you mind if I take just a couple of minutes and kind of walk through some of the structure that may answer some of these questions?
All right, that would be fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, the bulk of the bill starts on 143, but really down in 150. And it speaks to the Small Business Procurement Enhancement Program. Now, I want to really emphasize line 153 that these are goals. And these goals match up to the executive order that trying to achieve 42% of the certified small business utilization. All right, so these would be goals set in place by state agencies and covered institutions to try to achieve these goals. You would be working with the Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity to set them up. In this section, there are a couple of questions. And the contractors question the utilization of capital outlay construction, which is something that will likely be addressed in a moment. We are going to amend, I'd like to offer an amendment in a moment, the add a minimum, because you see the set aside, purchases up to $100,000 would be set aside, $10,000 for micro businesses. That does not preclude you from going over that amount, but that just says that is our target, but you could offer a higher amount. To Delegate Bell's question, the fair and reasonable, we talked about, and Delegate Ward worked very hard on this, and as she said, she's been doing this over multiple administrations. Should we lay out there a 5% threshold over and above the low bid? The reason that the thought process is not to lay out a percentage number is up in line 163, and that is the certified two-bidder rule. So you have to have at least 2 certified small businesses available to compete to get into the fair and reasonable category. And so we just didn't want to disadvantage if Mason and McPike small business didn't fall under this criteria. If there were not 2 small business, we do not want to disadvantage businesses that do not fall under that. So that's why the standard is still fair and reasonable and would be determined by the procurement manager, which maybe Senator McPike would like to speak to in a moment. Down in women-owned and minority business, you see once again, in B, it's a goal of 23%, and we say the availability, the needs of the procurement, the reasonable costs and considerations laid out in line 178 to 179. I really want to highlight line 182 going into page 4, 183. Contract goals set by state agency or covered institution for a particular contract that may be higher or lower than the overall 23.1% goal established and may, under appropriate circumstances, be 0. So, Mr. Chairman and members, this indicates very clearly that there are going to be places, or could likely be places, that the availability of these services, the availability is just not there. So it very clearly lays out that these goals could be at 0. Or there may be no one available to do the job, right? Probably the biggest source of consternation, Mr. Chairman, is in 198 to 216, because we are going to lay out in the future. Now, again, contractors need to have goals set out as to how they are going to participate in these programs. So you see little I 1, 2, and 3, and then 3 as A and B, that speaks to what we're going to establish: uniform methodology, conduct panels to review, implementing processes. All right, this is one of the rationales for moving forward. This needs to be laid out. Because, Mr. Chairman, down in 214 and 216, if in fact there isn't good faith, it could be up to a 1-year debarment. All right, that's a big deal. All right, so the governor's office has agreed to set a working group together, if we can get this bill moving forward, that would include contractors and people subject to these rules and regulations to be a part of the group that sets up how they would be reviewed. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, we will address in a moment, I hope, in lines 286 to 297, there's been a $200,000 threshold, and then that was struck, and there's been some negotiation with 1 or 2 groups to move that to $125,000. We would like to standardize that across the board to $125,000, which is a significant increase to transportation-related construction. We will note that, but it would be $125,000 for all groups. And so, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just I wanted to kind of lay out some of those things that we've been working through, and hopefully that provides some clarity to the committee. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Delegate Ward for all her hard work on this.
Mr. Chairman,
Clearly, yes.
following up on Senator Mason's remarks about what Senator Bell was asking about, let me cite one example when the micro program started, I guess about 7 years ago. I had a SWAM certified business contact me, and he was livid. He had been doing business with the state for a number of years. The particular item that he was selling the state, he was told he could no longer do it. It had to go to a micro business. So he went to his friend down the street who had a small retail business and started selling him the exact same product at the same price that he had been selling it to the state. The small business marked it up, the micro business marked it up 30%. That continues today, I believe. How would this, the language in this bill, address that type situation? There were no standards set when the micro business program was established. We need to, I think we all want small businesses to grow and develop, but there has to be some sensitivity to how we're treating the taxpayers of Virginia.
Mr. Chairman.
You want to respond?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, Senator Ruff, that is right. That is an unusual circumstance. I'll point you to line 37 that defines microbusiness as 25 or fewer employees with an average gross receipts of $3 million or less for the previous 3 years. So that's the definition we utilize. And in the case that you're speaking of, lines 160 to 62 will we hope read, purchases up to $100,000 shall be set aside for award to certified small businesses, except that purchases up to $10,000 should be set aside to award for micro business. So we certainly don't want to pass to a small business and increase 30%, but in this case, we would be targeting contracts under $10,000 at that point. So it wouldn't necessarily on point address yours unless that was deemed to not be fair and reasonable if another micro business came in and offered the same contract. That's where we're trying to get to the two bidder rule to try to make sure that there's competition within a micro business in that circumstance.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator
I
Ruff.
certainly agree with that, but in a lot of cases, you're not going to find the two bidders.
That's right.
You're going to find that somebody's going to get the inside word and nobody else is. A number of businesses started up in the first couple of years after the micro-business program started. They would just be watching the procurement process. Then if they needed 10 cases of water, they would turn around and go to Walmart or wherever, buy it very, very cheap and mark it up very, very high and to over 100 to 200%. Because that was the only bid coming in, that's the only action that took place. So how do you deal with that type of situation if there is not some standard that you're going to have as to what kind of protection for the taxpayer as to a percentage markup over other bidders?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Senator Bell.
first, I think Delegate Mason, Senator Mason, did a good job of explaining this. But I think in the instance where it costs money for companies to do bids, and saying that when they open the solicitation up, if it is to just find the market price and then perhaps award to the small business, businesses will catch on to that, and I think they'll stop bidding on those. But I would encourage the Secretary to set, when he sets this up, on many items, I think they can find a fair and reasonable price from a little bit of research. And maybe that's a way of doing it, require market research as part of it. Now, there are some services in some areas where I agree with you, you can't find another bidder. And it's hard to get a market price for that. And I've had experiences with procurement and doing that before, where there's one game in town, and frankly, if you wanted another service provider, it's going to cost you a big premium to get them to come and do that in that remote area, perhaps. So, but I would encourage them to put market mechanisms into whatever guidance they provide.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
this is Brian Ball again, and I guess as a preliminary matter, I wanted to thank you for taking up this bill this morning and the time you've allowed us to speak to it. And I didn't get a chance to do that earlier. But in response to Senator Ruff's and Senator Bell's comments, yes, it is on us to determine whether a bid is fair and reasonable, and that's irrespective of whether there's two bids or not. If we don't feel, if SPSD determines that the bids are not, or the procuring agency working with SPSD determines that the bids are not fair and reasonable, then we do have to have mechanisms to make sure we can put the bid back out, put the solicitation back out to get to that point.
All right.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Member Pike.
just to reinforce Secretary Ball's comments, I mean, it happens every day where either the scope of work that's laid out within the procurement solicitation, you receive bids and evaluate that the bids are exceeding what you estimated. You have the ability to cancel the bid, resolicit, reevaluate what you put in the scope of work to ensure that you're getting the value. And I think to Senator Ruff's example, I mean, it's incumbent upon the procurement officer that's responsible for that procurement to do fair market estimates. I mean, typically what you do in a procurement plan is meeting your budget, your SWAM goals, and other values to make the determination. And yet, if you have something that far exceeds what should be in the marketplace, you have the ability to cancel. I mean, I think you have that today, and I think as I read it, you would still have that under this bill, the ability to evaluate and document this far exceeds what's available in the market. I'll acknowledge that sometimes market conditions press on certain industries and the work becomes pricier because they're busy with other work. Those are factors then also have to be determined and get a little bit more complex. But certainly this, as I read it, still allows the same flexibility to procurement officers to make determinations of value and what's available in the marketplace.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Senator Ruff.
I think Senator McPike makes some good points, and I agree with a lot of that. But the problem when you start setting quotas, it becomes the responsibility of people in government to meet those quotas to satisfy their bosses and to satisfy the language of the legislation. And I'm not sure that without some hard statements of how that's going to be achieved, of being competitive, then I feel a little bit uncomfortable.
All right. Delegate Ward.
Yes.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. Want to make sure I understand this, and then get questions sort of how part of the goals were developed. As I read the bill, it appears though as if the state entity or the public body expects a contract to be able to be acquired for less than $10,000, then that would be set aside and would be only for micro businesses to bid on that contract. Is that correct?
At this time, I'm not absolutely sure, but I believe that's what it is. But if you don't mind, I would like to yield to Secretary Ball because
Okay.
the bill has been changing. They've been working on it, and the most recent information, of course, would come from members of this committee who's been working on it along with the administration, because the administration has really written and taken care of this bill to make it as fair as possible.
All right. Secretary Ball, am I correct that if you anticipate that a particular contract would be less than $10,000, that would be set aside for only micro businesses to bid on, and that if it's between $10,000 and $100,000, only small businesses would be allowed to bid on that with this set aside? Is that correct?
I think that is correct, sir.
All right. Then my next question is, on terms of the percentages, which are 42%, 23.1%, and 50% in terms of the subcontracting, how are those percentages arrived at?
The 42.
And how do they stack up compared to what the current percentages are in terms of the actual contracts
We currently have an executive order in place, sir, that addresses the 42% for small women and minority-owned businesses. It also addresses the 50% that you mentioned. The provision that is new in this measure before you is the 23.1% for women and minority-owned businesses, and that was derived as a result of the disparity study which we recently completed. And what we saw there over the last 5 years is that women and minority-owned businesses accounted for 13.4% of state procurements, but based on the extensive work done by our consultant in the disparity study, there were available women and minority-owned businesses that would have suggested that they would have participated at the 32.8% level of contracts awarded, so that there was a substantial disparity. Recognizing that we wanted to have a narrowly drawn race and gender conscious measure, we averaged those two numbers and arrived at the 23.1%.
All right, I figured there had to be some calculation in there to get to 23.1 rather than 23.2. So
the average of those two numbers.
yes, okay. All right, and what is the rationale for 50% on subcontracting, and how do we stack up on subcontracts now?
I'm going to defer to some of the folks from DGS and transportation, but it is my understanding we're doing very well on that one, but I am not the person to speak to the specifics of that, sir.
All right, is there anyone to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm going to ask either Jennifer Mayton or Sandra Gill to speak to that. I see Jennifer, who is the interim director at Small Business and Supplier Diversity.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. This is Jennifer Mayton, Acting Director, Small Business Supplier Diversity, like Mr. Ball said. The subcontracting around capital outlay is going very well. The state as a whole is at 38% roughly right now in their contracting efforts, and we would like to stretch and push that goal to 50%, which is what is defined in Executive Order 35 and has been in place since 2019. So we want to do some more work there and strengthen our efforts to push toward that 50% goal.
All right. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment before you go to your speakers. And I think that Senator Hoshman and Senator Edmond also were in the queue. Okay. I was wondering how long it was going to be before the word quota came up, and it did. I think that I've been here long enough that this probably is my third disparity study. So I'll probably be here long enough to go through another disparity study. So I guess my question would be, how much longer are we going to have to go through disparity studies before we address the issue at hand? That is dealing with the issue of fairness and equity when it comes to small business and women and minority-owned businesses in the procurement business. And we now have an opportunity to do so, but we're still questioning whether or not we ought to, and how we go about doing so. We already been told that there's probably going to be in 8 years yet another disparity study. So we know that the disparity exists. The governors have issued executive orders around this whole issue. Delegate Ward has been doing this bill, I know, for at least the last 3 or 4 years, where we refuse to even begin to address it. So I guess my concern is, we now have an opportunity to begin to address it. So why don't we, is my issue, my question. And for those who are concerned about the legislation, What are your suggestions for fixing it?
All right, Senator Hashmi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a question that's coming from some of our local governments. It's line 323, and this is in the existing code, but I was wondering if Secretary Ball could please clarify that language, Section B, where it states, all public bodies shall establish programs consistent with this chapter. Does the language apply to local governments? Does it apply to entities such as county libraries and other county institutions? If he could clarify this language, that would be helpful.
Yes, ma'am, and I may again defer to Jennifer Mayton. That's current code language, and it does apply to all public bodies. I will tell you, however, that the language that is before you in HB 5002 deals specifically with purchases by state agencies and covered institutions.
Any further comment or question, Senator Hashmi?
So just to clarify, even though this is an existing code, then the changes that we are making in 5002 would not apply to local government. Am I correct in that?
That is the way I'm reading it, ma'am. And I've spoke earlier with Bill Hefty, who does a lot of local government work, and he believes that to be the case. And localities would need to do. We would encourage them to be compliant, but they would need to do their own disparity studies. Our disparity study focused on state contracting.
Thank you, Secretary.
All right, Senator Eben.
No, I was just going to ask on the same topic. I saw in some places it says any public body, some places it says any state public bodies. So I had the same question as Senator Hashmi. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator McPike.
Yeah, changes to, on lines 237, changes to 2.2-4303 apply to all public procurement contracts, as I read it. Is that correct, Secretary Ball?
Which line was that, sir, please?
So you have changes to sections starting for sections 2.2, 4303, and you've changed in this bill lines 288 through 296. By doing so, those apply to all local governments and all public bodies. Is that correct?
288 and 296. Uh, 288 allows public bodies to establish purchase procedures. That's the small purchase threshold. And I will defer to Jennifer Mayton on that if she can provide some additional clarification on that.
Yes. So on 286, it says that public bodies may establish. So we have the expectation that local governments could establish these procedures, but we would expect state agencies to establish these procedures. One thing that had been discussed, if there needed to be clarification, we could clearly state on this line in 323 that it be state public bodies, not all public bodies, if there is a concern.
All right. Anything else, Senator Eben? Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to address the general situation here, as Senator Locke did earlier, I think what we all want is to do this well. We have a disparity study done on this executive order, which shows it didn't work, and now we're looking to codify it. I know from my short time in the Senate that this entire time I have had small women-owned businesses coming to me talking about the hardship and frustration with this executive order. We want to get this right. Leaping to codification before we have this achieving the goals we want, even when our own disparity studies show that it's not working, is passion without good outcome. We have to be very careful in legislating passion without good outcome. I think we're going to hear a lot of testimony today But the idea is not to do another study on the same thing. The idea is to maybe have a real conversation with stakeholders, that some of whom we're going to hear from today, and accomplish the goal effectively. But we're not doing that, and apparently there hasn't been incredibly robust conversation about these concerns. And here we are now, not having had a conversation, moving to codify something that's not working. That is my assessment as I'm hearing, and I'm talking about women-owned businesses. I am the owner of a business, and so we need to think carefully about this. But let's hear the testimony.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Boysko.
No, Senator Reed.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, I'm in the queue already. I just want to clarify. So my understanding of what the bill does is it takes the information that we know from the disparity study, and then it's putting in steps that we need to take that are not being done currently to meet those goals. Is that accurate? If Mr. Secretary or the patron could respond.
Secretary Ball, you want to respond on that?
Yes, that is accurate.
Thank you.
All right, anything further? Okay. Senator Reed.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify, and hopefully council is listening. If I can bring the committee's attention to line 323, letter B, it says all public bodies shall. And then if you go down to line 320, starts on 326.27, it throws in what's italicized. What concerns me is that it was said that it wouldn't, and there'd be certain localities that have to do disparity studies, but that's not what B says. It says all public bodies shall establish. So if council can clarify what the secretary was talking about, that would be appreciated.
Secretary Ball, you want to respond on that?
I think that question was directed to council, sir.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, my interpretation of it is that, as Senator Reeves said, it would apply to all public bodies, state and local, unless there is a local public body that for some reason has exempted themselves or are otherwise exempt from the Procurement Act.
Mr. Chairman.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, it does appear to me to be pretty clear that that language that Senator Reeves was identifying does require all public bodies shall establish programs, and the programs established shall comply with the Small Business Procurement Enhanced Program established in Section 1619 and the Women and Minority-Owned Business in Section 1620. Can anyone explain why that would not mean that this is not just a state requirement, but would also would affect localities?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Mason,
So I think a moment ago when they were addressing it, the interim director said that she might, if we added state in there, it might take care of that. I have a series of amendments, and when we get to that point, I'd be willing to offer that, provided that the patron of the bill is acceptable to them.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just make one additional statement and then I'll shut up.
Yeah, go ahead. Senator Locke.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, what agencies do is they simply wait out each governor. You know, they just wait out governors. You know, every year, every 4 years, you know, there's a governor, they just simply wait them out. Some governors will do executive orders on this issue, some may not. So all they have to do is just wait them out. So what codification will do, you know, is put this in the code.
Right.
So we don't have to do this waiting out period. You know, that means that we have this, and it's known that this is what has to be done.
All right. Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Delegate Ward.
Delegate Ward.
Yes, just before we go too much further, not to belabor the point or argue with the senator, but the research that I have seen is since this executive order have been in effect, starting back with Executive Order 20, their procurement has risen from 1.4 5% for women and minority-owned businesses to about 13%. So according to the reports I have seen, it is good for small businesses because they are increasing in the amount of business procurement they have been receiving.
All right, and just to provide additional comment on that, when I first got elected in 2007, I was appointed to the Small Business Commission and was on that my first 12 years, not the last year or so. And what we struggled with this because actually what we were finding was that there was about 40% of the contracts went to small businesses, but very few of those went to women or minority-owned businesses. And I recall it, I don't recall the specific figures, but I do recall it being in the low single digits there. So it was somewhere in the 2 to 3 to 4% range there for women and minority-owned businesses. So the 13.4 is clearly an advancement over what we had had over the last several years, since roughly 2010. So, all right. Well, if there are no more questions right now, what we can do is go to public testimony. I think we have about.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Would you like to do amendments prior to public testimony, or?
We might have more after.
Yes, sir. That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
After we've heard testimony, et cetera. All right. We're going to have everybody with a 2-minute limit there, which would hopefully give everybody time to be able to say what they need to say and want us to hear so that we can factor that into our decisions.
If you would like to speak in support of the bill, please raise your hand. Daquan Love, please go ahead.
Good morning. I'm Daquan Love, Executive Director of the Virginia State Conference NAACP, which stands in firm support of House Bill 5002. Senator Locke's comments earlier today are spot on. Frankly, how many more disparity studies will the Commonwealth need to ensure that we actually change and codify equity into our laws? Enough is enough, and we need to ensure that small, Black, and other minority-owned businesses get a fair shake when they are trying to work with our state government. Frankly, the Commonwealth needs to put its money where its mouth is. We can't just talk about equity, inclusion. We've got to put our money where it is. By passing HB 5002, we'll be able to ensure that our state government contracts, more of them, go to the growing, diverse, small and minority businesses here in the Commonwealth. The Virginia State Conference, NAACP, and our branches across the state fully support this bill and urge you to pass it without further delay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mai Tran, please go ahead. Please unmute yourself.
Our perspective from Virginia Asian Chamber of Commerce is to, first of all, go back to that disparity study. Our leadership have been sitting on that disparity study together with our memberships for the last maybe 3. And how many more, just like Senator Mamie Locke have said. Number 2, as I hear the various scientific requests for more scientific justification of quota, procedures, disciplines, after all, like Delegate Ward had concluded, because we have seen a progress in the number of contracts given to small minority businesses, we urge the General Assembly to pass this law so that Secretary Ball and the administration can continue to work on all the standards and the mechanism so that we can achieve total perfection. However, reminding you in procurement fairness of public, how that is a long process. And I don't think that any procurement process is complete yet so far, even with mainstream calculation of bidding and contract fairness. Thank you.
Thank you.
Patrick Cushing, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Patrick Cushing on behalf of the American Council of Engineering Companies and the American Institute for Architects. And I just want to take a few seconds to thank the administration and the patron. We worked with them on some of the amendments that you've seen related to the small purchase exemption. That's probably been the biggest issue for us. And with the amendments, we can support the bill. And with that, we've looked over the disparity study, and I think in the professional services category, you see a fairly significant disparity, and that's something that both associations and industries have been working very hard on. This bill certainly takes a step in the right direction, and I do want to say that the language in the bill, there are some significant changes, but I think by far the most significant impact for our industries will be in implementation. And so we really, I think the administration has reached out and assured us that we will be at the table to work on issues with implementation, because that's really where we're going to see some significant changes get made. And when we do that, we want to make sure that the integrity of the procurement process is upheld. And particularly for those in the architect and engineering fields, we want to make sure that that everybody has a fair shot at a contract while moving the needle on the disparity within those industries. And so with that, we can support the bill today. And again, thank the patron and the administration for having this conversation with us.
All right, thank you.
Carol Craig, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Carol Craig, Government Relations Specialist for UVA Health. And UVA Health is appreciative of the administration's attempt to bring more diversity to the state's procurement process. And we support and participate in the state's SWAM program. However, we are grateful that the House recognized the need to slow down the implementation of HB 5002 with respect to UVA and VCU health systems by adding a 2-year delayed enactment for us. We think it's important to look more carefully at how this legislation could impact our health systems. The healthcare industry is very different from other industries. It's very specialized and highly regulated. And many of the procurement of medical supplies and devices are done in large part through group purchase organizations or GPOs. In fact, every hospital in Virginia utilizes a GPO for procurements. So it will be important to look at how this legislation impacts our ability to use our GPO contracts to avoid any unintended consequences. And I believe Kira Gunther from VCU wants to speak to this too, but one other thing I would say, another thing that would be important to examine is how this might limit our ability to procure certain physician preference items such as implants and screws. Our purchase selections are often driven by our physicians' preferences, and oftentimes they've been trained to use certain, implants, screws, that sort of thing, and that's what they're comfortable with, and that's what they want to use. So if we're not able to get that particular thing for them, it could impact our ability to recruit certain physicians if they're not going to be able to use what they'd like.
Can you wrap it up pretty quickly here? You're over time.
Okay, so I thank you for your consideration.
All right.
Kara.
Next.
Kara Gunther, please go ahead.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Kara Gunther with VCU Health System. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and I will do a quick echo of my colleague Carol Craig's comments at UVA. We absolutely reiterate our support for the underlying policy of this bill. And I think Carol has captured our concerns well. The House did, as you know, adopt a 2-year delayed effective date. I think as we contemplate how this could apply to the 2 state teaching hospitals, and I will note that it would only apply to us and none of the other hospitals in the state of Virginia. So it would put your 2 state teaching hospitals on somewhat of an unlevel playing ground with the private hospitals in the state, particularly as we come out of the pandemic, in which we've seen such an incredible strain on the healthcare supply chain already. I think that we are absolutely willing to work with the administration over the next 2 years. Unfortunately, until the healthcare supply chain radically changes, most of what we have to procure is, as was already noted, highly regulated, highly scientific, and unfortunately, typically only available through international companies, large international manufacturers. We are concerned that probably there won't be significant change within the next 2 years as it relates to the supply chain. Even outside of the pandemic, I think Carol Craig noted that most of our supplies are internationally procured, and oftentimes they are the preference of our physicians. So we wouldn't want to find ourselves in a position where we are not able to recruit the top talent to the state's 2 academic medical centers. And thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Michelle Fowler, please go ahead. Ms. Fowler, we can't hear you.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, thank you. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Michelle Fowler. I am a SWAM certified in my micro business. I went through the Scaling for Growth program through the SBSD, which was incredibly helpful for us as small businesses. I am a professional services business doing internal audit, and I just want to bring a couple of thoughts to the committee today from one of the small businesses. So women and minority businesses, we are opening businesses at 1.5 times our counterparts. And if we want to do what's good and advance the economy in Virginia, I think it's important that we look at where small businesses are opening and how we can help support them. No bill is perfect. I think anybody that's in government, we know that as we pass bills and regulations, I work in banking in a highly regulated industry, that there's often unintended consequences. But until we move our agenda forward and we actually, put our money where our mouth is and pass bills to actually decrease this this equity divide, then we're not going to move our small, minority, and women-owned businesses forward. So I just want to say that we're not, as small businesses, we're not looking for a hand out. We're looking for a hand up. We just want a seat at the table, and we want to be able to have the same opportunity that our large counterparts have. And as long as procurement departments stay with the large businesses they're currently working with, and they don't look outside that, we won't move forward. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next.
Keenan Artis, please go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and members of this body. I do appreciate your time and your effort. My name is Keenan Artis, and I am founder and president of Triton Light Medical. We're a Chesterfield, Virginia-based organization located in Chesterfield, Virginia. We stand in full support of HB 5002. We certainly applaud the leadership of SBSD in the diversity study, the disparity study that they conducted, and then acting upon the outcomes of that study. Further, I am pleased by the level of engagement and debate around this issue, as it's extremely important. As a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business, we do a fair amount of business with Department of Veterans Affairs, more specifically with VHA, the Veterans Health Administration, the hospitals of the VA. And they have a very robust service-disabled, veteran-owned small business set-aside program. So as a result, I've seen these types of socioeconomic focused activities work and work very well. I think that this body specifically and the Commonwealth more generally is on the right path in putting in place a world-class program much akin to the Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business program that the VA fields. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Next.
John Easter, please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm John Easter with Chamber RVA, which is the regional chamber here in the Richmond area. We have had over the last year a focus on two key strategic areas. First of all, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And secondly, trying to help small businesses, especially as they're trying to recover from COVID effects. We believe this bill kind of goes to both of those points. We believe that small and minority-owned and women-owned businesses are absolutely a critical part of an overall healthy business climate. And we think this bill is designed to help enhance that critical component, and we support it. I would say that we do a lot of work with local governments, and we would be very supportive of the amendments that have been discussed, possible amendments that have been discussed today, which would be to clarify that this relates to state contracts in particular, just to get rid of any ambiguity that might exist. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Next.
James Fobbs, please go ahead.
Good morning, Chairman and the committee. On this morning, I thank you for this opportunity of being here. I'm James Fobbs, president of Fobbs Quality Science. Also, I'm a member of MBL. And I would like to thank all those who spoke heavily, Delegate Ward and Mr. Montgomery Mason and Ms. Larkin, who spoke strongly of this HB 5002 bill, which I'm greatly supportive of. I've been a micro business for 2.5 years, been a small business, and it has been very little opportunity. Thank God I made it through the pandemic, but many of small business and micro business didn't make it. So this will help us hopefully get over the hump if we can get a level playing field. We know this system haven't been working for us, and we just hope we can get past this bill and get the opportunity to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
And our final speaker in support is Michelle Gowdy. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Michelle Gowdy from the Virginia Municipal League, and I just want to echo Mr. Easter's comments about the amendments clarifying local government. We really appreciate that.
All right.
If you would like to speak against the bill, please raise your hand. Philip Abraham, please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Phil Abraham of the Vector Corporation, representing Old Dominion Highway Contractors Association. Before you start my 2 minutes, I just want to touch briefly on the comments of Senator Locke and Chairman Ward, because it's never easy to get up and raise concerns about a bill like this. And I want to make it clear, I don't dispute in any way the need to improve the SWAM and DBE program, and to make it clear that the thrust of House Bill 5002 is worthy and very important. The Chairman Ward, the administration, Secretary Ball, and the governor are all to be commended for their important work on this. And I'm going to give you very targeted suggestions for improving the bill. I don't talk about this much, but I'm the son of an immigrant who, for some strange coincidence, passed away 1 year ago today. I honor my dad by briefly noting that 85 years ago this year, he fled Nazi Germany by ship by himself at the young age of 15 and came through Ellis Island to this country for a better life. And he always taught me about the importance of equal opportunity, regardless of race, economic position, or religion, or other factors. And that's why this bill is important, and it will help achieve many of those goals. That being said, for those of us who speak today, and many who aren't, we have some concerns about the precise language in this bill. Like you, Mr. Chairman, we've been frustrated by the very rushed process that brings this bill before you today, 2 days before adjournment. And we'd like you to consider some of our concerns that are raised by at least 10 other groups and state vendors from construction as well who will speak to you today. We ask you to just make 4 simple amendments. First, we ask you to allow the bill to become law, but add a 1-year delayed effective date so the statute doesn't become fully effective until July 1, 2022. Number 1 request I've heard from everyone who has concerns with the bill as drafted. A delayed effective date will give the Department of Administration time to build a new division, hire its employees, give guidance to state agencies in higher education, and how all the moving parts will work, and allow stakeholders to work with the administration to produce technical and clarifying changes that will make it a better bill and increase its likelihood of success. Second, eliminate the sentence in lines 213 to 215 that were mentioned previously that will allow 1 or more government employees to debar a business that could force it to lay off its employees or even shut down for failure to act in quote unquote good faith. This is in essence a death penalty provision. It makes no sense to tie such a penalty to such a low bar and vague standard. Third, as mentioned at lines 291 through 296, we propose lowering the 800% increase in the small purchase provisions proposed in this bill and bring it down to the $125,000 level that was granted to professional services. That would be a 56% increase for professional services in the limit and still a 500% increase for transportation. No one's mentioned this, but it's important in that section to put in there that in using these increased threshold, they can only be used for—
Could you try to finish up quickly, Phil?
Yes, my last point is we asked for a clarifying amendment on the new capital outlay language at line 56. When all of you hear that term new capital outlay, I think you think of the Appropriations Act process for buildings. And we ask you to make it clear that those words are as defined in the Appropriation Act for those projects that are approved. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Next.
Melissa Ball, please go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me to speak with you today. I am a woman-owned business here in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm here to express my opposition. One of the things this bill would do is to establish a set aside for micro purchases under $10,000 for micro businesses. The unintended consequence, as we've already seen with the previous executive order, would be the exclusion of many small minority and woman-owned businesses from competing for a significant portion of the business of the Commonwealth. I know this for a fact because the previous executive order excluded me from doing business with the state. It may be surprising and you'd ask how, but my employee size and gross revenue is just beyond the criteria to qualify as a micro. Yet the size of the orders I could do with the state are well below the $10,000 set aside for micro businesses. In fact, my average order size is about $250 since my company sells office supplies, a commodity with historically low margins. I've heard a lot of conversation, valuable conversation today, specifically as it relates to contracts and procurement pieces. The business that I do is very transactional, small purchases. And I agree very much with what Senator Ruff said earlier, and some of the examples he noted have happened in my industry as well. I have had specific occasions with buyers where I've received a phone call saying they would like to purchase from us, or we've called on them to try to engage with them, and their answer has been, we cannot buy from you because you are not a micro business. So in the past, I've been able to do business with the Commonwealth, and now I cannot. This has had a very negative impact on the salaries and jobs of our employees over the last many years due to changes we've had to enact to survive as a business to keep everyone employed. And like many small businesses in Virginia, we're still suffering the effects of the pandemic, and we desperately need the opportunity available to fairly compete for business with the Commonwealth of Virginia. That said, I highly support diversity procurement initiatives. In fact, Governor Mark Warner had an executive order that brought us to the table, allowed us to engage.
Can you wrap up quickly?
Yes, ma'am. Engage and perform and compete. I would ask that we allow for time to better understand what competing fair and reasonable means, and to allow us to evaluate the full impact.
All right, thank you. Next.
Nicole Riley, please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Chairman and members. Nicole Riley with NFIB. Melissa here that you just heard from is a member of ours. So she certainly gave you a real life example. And that's why we would specifically ask for an amendment that does state the 5% threshold. There have been instances where she actually even had a better price, but because she was not a micro business, they would not even accept that. And so we do think it is necessary to clarify that that 5% standard is there, and that frankly, state agencies are allowed to use it. I think that's the biggest thing too in the way of implementation. Second of all, I guess our question is, we have, why would you kind of lower the threshold for professional services when the disparity study shows that that's the most opportunity for women and minority-owned businesses to do? It's 50% more opportunity, whereas goods and services and construction are in the 20s. And then we're really not clear about whether a woman-owned business who is small but not micro would be able to sell anything under the micro set aside of 10,000, even though there is this 23.1% goal that you're trying to reach. So again, we want to try to do all that we can to really promote women and minority-owned businesses doing business with the state. We just like to try to make sure we get it right and we don't unnecessarily cut people out of the process, and therefore support the delayed enactment date and any other considerations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Babur Mian, please go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak before you today. We are a certified DBE and SWAM business, and we also compete as a general contractor on state contracts. I respectfully ask that the committee put off the implementation of this bill for a year to allow everybody time to work through the due diligence requirements. The requirement that a GC will be disbarred for a year for not meeting the requirements if they don't show a good faith effort is really cumbersome. And I think there needs to be a better definition of that before this becomes law. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan
All right, next.
Kleinmore, please go ahead. Dan Kleinmore. Please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself. No, you're still muted. Julia Hammond, please go ahead.
Good morning, Julia Hammond on behalf of Associated Builders and Contractors. We support everything that Bill Abraham went through, in particular, all of the amendments he suggested. Just for time purposes, I'll point out all the other groups that stand behind everything Phil said. In addition to ABC, we have AGC, Associated General Contractors, Hampton Roads Utility and Heavy Contractors Association, obviously NFIB, Old Dominion Highway Contractors Association, Precast Concrete Association, Richmond Area Municipal Contractors Association, Virginia Transportation Construction Alliance, Virginia Roofing Professionals, Virginia Asphalt Association, and Virginia Heavy Construction Contractors. In addition to supporting all of the amendments, I'd point out that the conference report, the budget conference report, notes that obviously more needs to be done. Similar to the bill, though, it puts the study before the implementation of the bill itself. Under item 82, number 1C, it tasks a work group of all the procurement professionals to come up with a series of recommendations. But the first thing that they must do under the language is to come up with a way to incentivize positive business behavior by general contractors to support achieving the Commonwealth's discretionary spend goals for small, women, and minority businesses. It also sets a report date of September 1, 2021 for how this will go forward. So again, what Phil said, we probably should have a delayed enactment date so we can make sure we get all of the rules and structure and make sure this works right. I'd also add that the bill doesn't contain anything about making certification easier, faster, diversifying the size of business or the different types of businesses that are certified and the industries under which they're covered. That's part of the reason why the diversity study itself said that there was 50% growth under professional services, is there weren't that many certified under it. Shouldn't we be trying to make sure that we have volume in all of the categories so that there is plenty of opportunity, plenty of people who can bid on and win this good quality work? Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan Clymore, please go ahead.
Yes, I believe you can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay. I am Dan Clymore with Shirley Contracting Company, and we primarily work in the transportation industry, VDOT contracts, and so forth. This is a very complex bill involved in small business contracting, DBEs, and SWAMs my entire career, nearly 30 years. And I'm urging that the committee action on this bill or delay the implement date to give us time as stakeholders to work with our industry partners, VDOT, with the small business to figure out how this is going to be implemented. The devil is in the details, and there are frankly many things in here concern a lot of us, especially the penalty side of the phase, how this is going to be implemented, especially in transportation construction, affects the entire state. And what can occur in Northern Virginia, the same opportunities don't exist in the Shenandoah Valley or in the Bristol or in the Culpeper district. And the one size fits all standard of goals concerns me significantly, especially working in this industry. The disparity study just came out, and also the disparity study could easily show that the executive order has been ineffective. But now we're into codify an executive order that the disparity study could show has been ineffective. I think that's an issue that I see, and we need to determine how we're going to implement the steps that are going to be taken, how this is going to be done, and work with our industry partners before this can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brandon Robinson, please go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Brandon Robinson with the Associated General Contractors of Virginia. First, I would associate my comments with those of the other contracting and business groups who spoke in opposition to this legislation. But in so doing, let me make two quick points. First, AGC of Virginia and its members support increasing SWAM participation in procurement. We support a more diverse set of businesses participating, not just in procurement, but in contracting and building throughout the state and the industry. Just last year, in fact, we launched our own diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative, not just focused on our organization, but on the industry and changing the way the industry looks. So while we applaud the goal of this legislation, we cannot support the application as you see it before today. Something of this magnitude must be studied and vetted before passage. And let me give just a quick example of one of the dangers as the bill is currently written. So let's say I'm a prime contractor and I'm building a local school. To achieve the SWAM goal, I use a specialty contractor on HVAC insulation. That's a SWAM business. Now, we get into the project, and because this specialty contractor is the only SWAM business that does this, is very popular, and all of a sudden he's too busy to do the work. So now I've got a choice. I can go with the non-SWAM that I know that I've done business with and risk debarment for a year, which would be crippling to my business because I do so much procurement work. Or I could try and find one in North Carolina, West Virginia, and then cost is going to increase because of the travel. I don't know, can they meet my time schedules? Because there's someone I haven't worked with. So that's just this single example of the issues with this bill. So that's why we ask, as the others have mentioned, let's study this. Let's fully get all the stakeholders involved and digest it and come back next year and do something about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Mimi Coles, please go ahead.
Good morning. I'm Mimi Coles, Vice President of Marketing and Business Development with Permatile Concrete Products Company in Bristol, Virginia. We're a SWAM certified business that produces concrete pipe, precast concrete products, including bridge and box culvert for transportation infrastructure projects throughout the Commonwealth. It's unclear from reading House Bill 5002 what impacts it will have on our business. The rush to push through this one-size-fits-all bill so quickly leaves many questions unanswered. The creation of new programs and enforcement of existing programs are vaguely defined. The increased thresholds for non-competitive purchases for construction, the disbarment clause, are of great concern to our industry. Currently, there aren't enough SWAM businesses in heavy construction to perform the work that's necessary, and the threat of disbarment will further discourage participation in the public procurement process. Ultimately, it will cost the Commonwealth and the taxpayers additional money. Bills like House Bill 5002 discourage rather than promote the creation of heavy construction and other SWAM businesses. We respectfully request that you delay passing this bill until such time as the critical issues can be worked out, and request that the construction industry have the opportunity to participate in the process, as it will directly impact our business and the business of the Commonwealth. Thank you for your time this morning and your consideration.
Thank you. Next.
Our final speaker is Blair Williamson.
Good morning. This is Blair Williamson. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for allowing me to speak. I'm a heavy highway contractor in Charlottesville, Virginia. I'm the president of a third-generation family business that specializes in asphalt paving. I'm a SWAM contractor. I'm a licensed architect, a subcontractor, and a prime contractor. House Bill 5002 is a very aggressive bill that will have the effect of diverting scarce transportation revenues from a competitive low bid process with certified contractors to a negotiated, subjective, and loosely regulated process. In the Culpeper and Lynchburg districts where I primarily work, the funding for VDOT maintenance work has been cut by over 70% in the past 2 years and is not expected to rebound for another 5 years. This leaves companies like mine and employees in the rural areas of the state to struggle to stay afloat. This bill suggests 50% small business subcontracting for new capital outlay construction. What is new capital outlay construction? It's not defined in the text of the bill. I agree with the amendment proposed that would make it clear what types of projects are to strive for this goal. This bill allows a 1-year debarment of contractors that in good faith are not able to fully implement subcontractor goals. It really concerns me that I could be forced to lay off 165 employees at my company because someone believes I didn't act in good faith, whatever that means. At present, there are mandated DBE requirements in VDOT contracts. On many projects, even with smaller goals, we struggle to find qualified women or minority-owned subcontractors. This bill needs a year. Please agree with the proposed amendment to include a delayed effective start date. This will allow necessary time for the new Division of Small Business and Supplier Diversity to be created and for guidelines to be established so it can enforce the new regulations in a logical, predictive, and fair manner. It will also provide enough time to consider any changes to the statute that could help clarify it and make the program a success. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. No one else? All right. You've heard public testimony now. Any committee discussion or questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Hashmi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question that perhaps the Secretary might be able to answer. Does the bill exclude now any benefit corporations that are based in Virginia or corporations that are owned by nonprofits in being able to qualify, especially if these nonprofits in turn do support the work of small business owners, minority and women business owners? I just wanted to see if there was any clarification on that concern.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm not aware of any exclusion, but again, I'm going to defer to Jennifer Mayton on that.
Senator Hashmi, there are no changes to the definition and there are no changes in the way that we would go about certifying. So there's no exclusions that exist as a result of this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me? Anything further?
I said thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you.
Actually, we did pass a bill this year that is allowing electric co-ops and others to be able to bid on some of these SWAM things. which was not the case has not been the case previously. So
That's right.
we have made a step in that direction. Senator Mason.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of amendments. Would you like me to offer them at this time?
Certainly, that would be.
All right, Mr. Chairman, there are a couple that address some of the points that were made by the groups that spoke, but I also want to confirm that Delegate Ward is still with us and that she is on board with each and every one of these, or I will not offer it. The first amendment, Mr. Chairman, is on page 3, line 160. We would strike at a minimum and simply say purchases up to 100,000 would be set aside. That does not mean you couldn't use higher contracts, but it just says purchases up to $100,000 and sets that as a number. You will note that that does not address the capital outlay construction that Mr. Abraham and others addressed, because at this point, I'm a bit unclear on how to properly do that.
All right.
That's the second amendment, Mr. Chairman, is between, you'll find between lines 286 and 296. This addresses some of the concern offered and directly, and on line 288, after the word insurance, we would say single or term contracts for professional services, transportation-related construction, and we would change the amount from 200,000 to 125,000. So this would be 125,000 for everybody involved. Okay, everyone deals with that same threshold. Finally, Mr. Chairman, there's one other amendment that would be online, that would be at the end of the bill in 465, that would give our universities and higher education a year to come into compliance. After the discussion and some of the comments made by Senator Reeves and others, we could add in that local governments. We could add the section into that 2.2-4310 that would give, so it would read, the provisions of this act shall not apply to covered institutions as defined in 2.2-1604 and 2.2-4310. So that is designed to give colleges and universities a year, as well as local governments a year. And Mr. Chairman, those are the three amendments that I would offer at this time.
Mr. Chairman, point of clarification.
Yes.
I thought the university said they had 2 years.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman and Senator Donovan, yes, ma'am, down in 465, we would then move notwithstanding the provisions of the second enactment of this act, which gives the University of Virginia Health and VCU Health, so it gives the hospitals the 2-year period because of their unique circumstances.
But you only want 1 year for
Just 1
the
year
others.
for universities and small and local governments to allow them, along with the people that Mr. Abraham and Ms. Hammond and others referenced, to be a part of the working group to determine how this could ultimately impact and if changes would need to be made in an ensuing General Assembly.
Further point of clarification.
Senator Donovan.
I thought we were excluding local governments altogether.
Ma'am, I'm trying to put them in with the universities to give that 1 year to be a part of that group.
Mr. Chairman.
There could be other ways to do it, but that's my
Mr. Chairman, if I could just make.
Just a second, Senator Bell. Yes, Senator Donovan, there was a statement made that local governments were not covered, but Senator Reeves pointed out that there is language that basically, essentially, without necessarily saying they are covered, it does indicate that they are covered there. So the 1 year type of thing would be something legitimate for us to consider here. Senator Bell.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to add about the local government portion, unless, I'm open to correction on this if I'm wrong, but I don't see there's any penalties for anything local. If the local government doesn't follow it, there's no penalties like there would be for other agencies. I mean, they're recommended, even though it's in here, but there's nothing that addresses what happens if they don't follow.
Mr. Chair, this is Brian Ball. That is correct.
All right. So local governments are covered with the amendment proposed. That would be delayed for a year for that coverage for local governments. And there is nothing in there as it relates to consequences or any penalties if they don't comply.
Mr. Chairman, do you want
Yes, Senator Donovan.
Do you want to entertain Senator Mason's amendments separately if we all have other amendments, or do you want to hear the other amendments and take them all in a block?
We can take them all up in a block. If anyone wants them separated, we can separate as well. So the amendments are presented in a block.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Before you deal with the amendment, I've been trying to find it, and I can't. If legislative services can tell me, does this specifically exclude out-of-state businesses from competing in this category?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ruff, I'm honestly not sure. I don't know if Jennifer or Secretary Ball can speak to it. I'm not sure.
Senator Ruff, we do have businesses that are certified in our program that are out of state, as long as they grant reciprocity to Virginia businesses in their certification process. This bill does not exclude certified businesses that are out of state to participate.
So let me make sure I understand this correctly. A business has 24 employees in Maryland or North Carolina could compete at an advantage over a Virginia company that has 26 employees. Is that correct?
If and only if they are certified, yes, and they allow Virginia businesses to certify in their home states. So our Virginia businesses would be able to be certified in, let's say, North Carolina and compete in the same way. But yes, you're correct.
Anything further?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Donovan.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of amendments. One would be on.
Let's take up Senator Mason's amendments first, and then come to yours next.
Okay.
So.
Mr. Chairman, can we find out if the patron is okay with those?
Delegate Ward.
Mr. Chair, I am aware of Senator Mason's, and yes, I am fine with his. I don't know the other amendments yet.
Okay. The other amendments haven't been presented, so we'll describe them when they are presented. We're going to first act on Senator Mason's amendments.
Mr. Chairman, I move Senator Mason's amendment.
All right. Senator amendments are moved, and there's a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Those amendments are adopted. Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On line 38, I would like to change the "and" after employees to "or." That addresses some of the concerns we heard from the small businesses that have faithfully been certified in Virginia, but have arbitrarily been excluded because they can't meet both of those qualifications.
All right. So this would allow someone who wanted to be a micro business for these contracts would either have 25 or fewer employees or annual gross receipts of $3 million or less.
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
And so can we hear from the patron if that's acceptable?
Right.
Sorry, I didn't have as much advance notice on this as others. I apologize. I wasn't prepared ahead of time.
Yeah, that's all right. Delegate Ward, did you hear the amendment?
Yes, I heard the amendment, and I am thinking right now, could I say yes at this point unless I hear something from administration, because to be honest with you, administration has worked so much on this bill, and I don't want to do anything that would interfere with what their intentions were.
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
All right. Yes, Senator Locke.
is that not changing the definition of a micro business?
Yes, it would. It would allow more businesses to qualify as a micro business.
Then I have a problem with that.
All right. All right.
And then, Mr. Chair, then I would also.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
The only thing I would say to Senator Donovan's amendment is, if you remember last year, Delegate Ward brought the effort to codify this executive order, and Delegate Lopez brought something similar to that. And so they were two different and competing ways, and that would then define a microbusiness as 25 or fewer employees, or an average annual gross receipts of $3 million or less over the previous 3 years. So that would and we heard the lady suggest that she fell in that category, but that would significantly increase the size of the business. So,
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
we have heard from businesses in Virginia that there are not enough businesses to compete in some of these sectors. This is clearly a small business, 25 or fewer employees, a micro business, or $3 million a year. And this is an opportunity to keep a definition. Micro business doesn't exist in the federal level. It keeps a definition of a business, but it allows more to compete, all still meeting the criteria for SWAM certification. Why is that a disadvantage? Because that allows us to bring in more, and we literally have heard from a SWAM qualified business that was excluded because of one of those benchmarks going forward. This is not a change to make it so that big businesses can get in. This is a change so that a definition we've come up with in Virginia that's been an obstacle to our loyal SWAM businesses in the past allows them to continue and compete, meeting all the other criteria of SWAM. And I think this is an important amendment, as we hear from so many businesses that there's not enough of them to fill the space we are creating. So let's allow for more.
Mr. Chair.
I think actually what this would do is those businesses that would pick up here, they're already in the small business category. So this would just add them to both the small business and the micro business category.
Correct. So I mean, this is not creating an obstacle. It's creating opportunity. If we're going to designate a certain percentage for SWAM, then why not let more of our small businesses be in that space?
Senator Vogel.
Mr. Chair, may I ask Senator Mason a question?
Yes.
Senator Mason, was this the definition in Delegate Lopez's bill from before?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Vogel, I don't know. I know that this was the other approach. It was adjusting small business and micro business. So I don't know specifically to that, ma'am.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can we hear from Secretary Ball on this?
Sure, I can ask that in a minute. I think this is clearly along the lines of what Delegate Lopez was trying to do with both the small business and the micro business. So, Secretary Ball.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I'm here.
Yes. There's been an amendment proposed that would, on line 38, for the definition of micro business, so make it so that rather than having 25 or fewer employees and an annual gross receipts of less than $3 million, would be if you met either of those two, the employee category, the restriction, or the gross receipts restriction, that you would then qualify as a micro business. Do you have any response on that?
Yes, sir. Appreciate you asking the question. We would like to leave the language as it is. We recommend that you all leave the language as it is. We've had extensive conversations with Delegate Lopez and others, and with stakeholders who have reached out to us. And the problem, we just were very focused on the disparity study and the issues before us, the things that Delegate Ward's been working on the last 3 years. We've committed to work with all the stakeholders post-session on what the definitions of small business and micro business are the subject of continual conversation. And those that are benefited by changes in definitions obviously welcome those changes. Those who are disadvantaged by them obviously don't want any changes. And it's quite a thicket. And I would encourage you all to leave the definitional changes out of this and just focus on the essence of the bill before you.
All right. Senator Dunlap, do you want to offer this as a motion? All right. Is there a second? Senator Ruff, you second? Senator Ruff, did you second that? Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that? All in favor, say aye. All opposed, no? The chair is uncertain. We will vote on the board. Donovan?
Ayes 7, noes 8.
All right, that motion fails. All right, follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I need to follow up on the local government amendment we just heard and approved, because I am now hearing from my local government, I don't know if the rest of you are, but it was their understanding in conversations that they were going to be permanently excluded. And that is the intent that we heard earlier. We heard the Secretary say that he believed they were excluded. We noted that the language did not support that, but now we have made them included with a one-year window. And I think we ought to have a conversation about that, because I know that there was a bipartisan conversation about localities being excluded. Am I correct?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Senator Reeves.
can we hear from Michelle Gowdy from BML on this issue? Because I think she might have a couple things to say. I know she's a licensed attorney about why the carve out. Michelle Gowdy from BML.
Okay. Is she there? Michelle, you want to respond on this particular issue?
Yeah, so this is Michelle Gowdy from BML. I'm going to apologize. My kids have been playing with the filter, so it looks really weird. So I apologize. But let me first say,
just thought you were off on spring break somewhere, but
I wish, right? Local governments understood from the beginning of this bill that we were not a part of the bill, and we were concerned about lines 323 through 328. And as Secretary Ball talked about this morning earlier, we understood that that was going to be amended or potentially amended to take us out of it. We have not done diversity studies for localities. Under the code, you would have to do an individual diversity study for every locality in the Commonwealth before we could meet any of these criteria. Quite frankly, that's an unfunded mandate, but also for the smaller towns and localities, that's an extremely difficult thing to do. And so when I got up earlier and supported the amendment, I expected the amendment to be that we would be removed from lines 323 to 328, and that's what we would request. Happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman.
All right. Yes.
I move that amendment, and I'm happy to hear from the Secretary if he wants to comment on that. But I understood as the conversation was going on that they too were going to be excluded in this, and then we can discuss again the amendment from Senator Mason. But at this moment, I'd like to move that amendment on those lines as mentioned.
All right. Is there a second to that motion? All right, we got a motion and a second to that for that amendment. Excuse me. Yes, Secretary Ball, do you want to respond to that amendment, which would, in effect, remove the language that's added on lines 326 through 328?
Yes, sir. The bill that we have before you, 5002, we addressed covered institutions and agencies. I will be candid with you all. I did not focus on lines 323 until this morning when this issue was raised. Unfortunately, we heard from no localities on this until, in my case at least, literally until this morning. So I'm trying to get some guidance on that as we speak, and I would ask Jennifer Mayton to comment on it as well, since she is the person who lives in this space the most. And as I understand it, this amendment that's being proposed would supersede the one-year delayed enactment amendment that Senator Mason has proposed.
Right.
And I would just offer the same recommendation that I did earlier to the body. If this is a concern, then I think that we could change lines 323 to say state public bodies instead of all, which would then exempt local governments versus the delayed enactment if that is the will of this group.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Amendment, I mean, starting on 323 up through the beginning of 326, that's existing code section.
yes.
That's right.
So I don't think that we want to take that part of it out. It's just the language that starts, the language that's added in 326 through 328, because that's what would bring local governments into having to meet the standards in section 1619 and section 1620.
I think that is correct, Mr.
All right, well, we have a motion.
I'll second
and a
that.
Second to strike that language in 326 through 328, the additional language. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. All right, that language then is stricken.
And now, Mr. Chairman, since I included reference to that being excluded for a year in my amendment, I'll move to strike that portion of my previous amendment. And just to be clear, Ms. Gowdy suggested she had agreement to an amendment. She and I have had no conversation, so I did not intentionally leave her or her localities hanging. But I would like to move to amend my previous to take them out of the 1 year.
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second to take out the 1 year thing related to the local government, since we're not including them now. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Okay, that motion passes.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Senator Barker, over here.
Yes, no. Go ahead, Senator Rupp.
On line 37, I would move that the definition of a micro business means add the word Virginia business that has been certified.
So you're proposing to add the word Virginia after A and before business on line 37. All right, there's a one-word amendment here. Is there a second? What's that? Yes, yeah. So that the proposal would limit the definition of a micro business to a business that is a Virginia business that has been certified in the department as a small business. So businesses from other states would still be able to be certified as a small business, but they would not be able to be certified as a micro business if this amendment passes, is adopted. Secretary Ball, do you want to respond on that?
Yes, sir. If I may, Mr. Chair, thank you. The law of unintended consequences applies when you do this. We have many businesses that do compete, that are Virginia businesses that do compete for business in neighboring states. Maryland, I know in particular, Jennifer Mayton can tell me which other states, but I think North Carolina would be one. And so the consequence of an amendment like this is that the reciprocity provisions that we've worked out with these other states will fall apart. And so they will take punitive actions against the contractors that we have in Virginia who want to compete in neighboring states. And so I would, our view would be would not be a helpful amendment. And
Mr. Chairman, may I have a question for Secretary?
Yes.
Mr. Secretary, I understand that as a variable in general, but we're talking about micro business, which is, I don't believe the other states have a definition of micro business, and you are creating a disparity of competition for our small businesses that are in Virginia that we're trying to shore up by allowing out-of-state businesses to certify for this new designation. And it may be newly codified, it's been around for a while, but it is a unique designation. So we're not talking about all competition. There wouldn't be any interference with that, but we're talking about just for this micro business definition, which if we allow out of state to compete will take away from our small businesses, and it's not really relevant for the other states because they don't have the micro businesses.
I would have to defer, Mr. Chair, to Jennifer Mayton on that. I thought they did. It's my understanding that they do.
All right.
Thank you, Secretary Ball. There are preferences to Senator Donovan's point. Microbusiness is a designation that's unique to Virginia. However, if other states were to create one or they have similar parameters, this could limit our ability from a reciprocity standpoint, because we tend to have a situation where if we enact provisions that limit participation of out-of-state businesses, then they respond in kind by limiting participation of our Virginia businesses. I would ask if Sandra Gill might want to speak to in-state preferences and any concern around that from the procurement standpoint.
That's very, yeah.
All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Sandra Gill, Department of General.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Sandra Gill, Department of General Services.
Yes.
Yes, identifying that a micro business be required to be a Virginia business would create a in-state preference that, as Secretary Ball identified, would create reciprocity at times, whereby currently a micro business does not have to be a Virginia business. And so those businesses located near the borders, Emporia, Southwest Virginia, Northern Virginia, that wishes to do businesses in other states could potentially be harmed by not receiving awards out of state if the other state elects to apply reciprocity.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
How would they apply reciprocity if they don't have the same definition?
Well, I think what the concern would be that they would not provide certification on their small businesses, because this would be a subset of our small
So it's
businesses.
hypothetical.
So, yeah, I mean.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you. As someone who lives near the border of Washington, D.C. and Maryland, I will say that there are a number of employees who live in Virginia who have businesses that may be in Washington or in Maryland who could also be adversely affected by this. And just since we are so close to other jurisdictions, I certainly would want to keep that in mind, that our constituents could end up being harmed by this.
All right. Is there any
Chair,
other discussion?
Chair, I should have deferred to Sandra Gill earlier. I think what we're saying is when you have programs like this and you insert your state's name in it and say it's only going to be Virginia businesses, that immediately sets off a red flag with our neighboring states. I just wanted to clarify that.
All right. Yes.
Could I ask Secretary Ball a question?
Yes.
Secretary Ball, it's Richard Stewart. I'm curious. I know this issue has come up before and must have. We've been voting on these bills for all of the years that I've been here. Do you have any data on how it might harm Virginia businesses versus benefit them? Northern Virginia is a really big place, and I represent part of Northern Virginia, and I see a lot of Maryland companies coming into Northern Virginia to do work. Do you know, or do you have any data that to say that it may injure us or actually benefit us?
Chairman, I do not have that data firsthand, but I will defer to either Ms. Gill or Ms. Mayton on that. When I do travel out of state, I can only tell you anecdotally, I do see Virginia businesses doing business in surrounding states throughout the region.
Senator, I will tell you that we hired VCU to do a study on the different certification types we have, because the definition has become an issue for a number of years, and we wanted to understand what it would really mean for our certified businesses here in Virginia. Unfortunately, that is not an issue that we have studied. We've studied definition changes, well, not specifically the micro business designation or a new definition change that called out Virginia businesses only. So we don't have empirical data right now to draw from to know exactly how it would impact our certified businesses.
All right. All right. Is there any other discussion? So we have a motion and a second on adding the word Virginia to line 37. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, no? No. I'm going to rule that noes have that one, so. Oh, okay, you want to do a count? All right, we can do a count. All right, put it on the board.
Ayes 7, noes 8.
All right.
Mr.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, can we try one more just for the fun of it? On line 166 at the end of that sentence, add, however, not to exceed a 10% differential.
All right, so that would put a percentage figure where it says develop guidance for determining whether a price is fair and reasonable, comma, not to exceed a 10% differential. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. All right. Is there a second to that motion? Is there a second to that motion?
Excuse me?
Is there a second?
Second.
Huh?
Oh, I'll second it.
Oh, okay.
I think we're debating whether or not it needs to be.
Mr. Chairman, speaking of the motion.
Yes.
So we talked, 10% is double what is referenced elsewhere in the bill. But we also talked about that with some groups trying to get beyond what we deem to be the fair and reasonable language that can be concerning. But I think the conversation with the patron and with others that worked through this prior was that including in line 63 where offers determined that fewer than 2 certified small businesses. So they kept the fair and reasonable rule, but had 2 certified small businesses that had to apply. Absent that, it was open. And so rather than putting a percentage in that, so Mason Ruff is a small business, but we don't fall under these qualifications. We're doing a $100,000 deal. Someone who does qualify bids $104,000, we bid $100,000, we lose, or we could conceivably lose by putting that number of 5%, or in your case 10% in, versus if Mason Ruff are the only other bidder and they're not 2, then it is just on the level playing field. So the 2 bidder rule above it, 2 lines, is an attempt to address that and not disadvantage other small businesses that might have qualified, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I understand Senator Mason's point, but I would just say that fair and reasonable is just like the term beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder, and that you without any guidance at all, if there's only one bid, they can mark it up 100%, and somebody may say, well, that's fair.
So, Mr. Chairman, or Senator Mason, should we make it 5%?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Senator Donovan, in the one bid scenario, remember above it is fewer, for this category of businesses that we're trying to give more opportunities to, there would have to be 2 or it would be opened up to everyone. So your one bid extortion situation is covered by 2 in that it would no longer be qualified for a small business procurement enhancement program. It would be open to everybody. And so ostensibly you would not be able to mark something up 100% because a 1,000-person employee company could come in and say, well, I can do it for 10% of that. Because without the 2 bids, you would open it up to the world. So that's the thought process there. But I take your point, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ruff and Mr. Chairman, about the verbiage.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Is there a proposed better way to solve the problem of the obscurity of fair and reasonable?
Basically what they said was they would do it through regulation this summer.
And Mr. Chairman, speaking to a larger picture, maybe through this amendment, if that's acceptable?
Yes.
So that's got to be worked out. I mean, you're exactly right. And you heard Mr. Robinson and Ms. Williamson speak to the concerns that they have on 195 to 215. And that is laying out the contractors. Now, Mr. Robinson's example of you have one small business or one minority owned who's overwhelmed and can't do it anymore is most clearly covered in 198 to 200. So that example is covered by the plain language of the law. But I hope but in this working group, the governor's office has confirmed that in this working group, and I hope Ms. Williamson by name or someone in her position with her experience, those contractors will be involved in the governor's working group to lay out the requirements and the guidelines. And within the confines of that discussion, Mr. Chairman, I would think the fair and reasonable, because what we get to there is good faith. And right, and no one is comfortable with good faith until 1I, 2I, 3I with A and B are all squared away, and that, along with the fair and reasonable language, can be worked out with this working group that would include contractors that are subject to these requirements. That's the way I would suggest we move forward, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Anybody else to comment on things? All right. The amendment is not to exceed 10%. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? No. The noes have it on that one pretty clearly, so. All right.
Mr. Chairman,
But it,
No, go ahead.
I mean, all these things are.
I have an amendment.
All these things are things that are legitimate issues, and we need to stay on top of things, monitor things, and make sure that the work group and everything is handling these issues and moving forward, so that if we feel it's necessary to step in next year or whenever and address these in the code, we could do that. So.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Senator Donovan.
So finally, in light of every comment I've heard here about the work group and going forward and engaging conversation and bringing everybody to the table and sorting out what the regs really mean and the clarity of the language and the unified intent to do this right, we are putting the law into effect before we actually have the working group results. And I move an amendment that we make this a delayed enactment to July 1, 2022, instead of 2021, so that we can have the benefit of that work group. And that sets an expectation that we're actually going to do this well. This is a late bill. The subject matter is something we all believe in, but we need to do this with prudence and with engagement. We need to do it with engagement of the people that this affects. And so that is my motion, Mr. Chairman, that we have a delayed enactment.
All right. Motion and a second to do delayed enactment.
Mr. Chairman, could we hear from the patron and Secretary Ball on this amendment?
Yes. Secretary Ball or Delegate Ward?
Can I just say quickly that this bill was to codify Executive Order 35. This executive order will cease to exist when the governor is gone. We would have to just about start from scratch, but I will yield now to Secretary Ball.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Barker, and thank you, Delegate Ward. We've worked really, really hard on this bill. You all have worked very hard on it. The House has worked very hard on it as well. And we are prepared. I have spent a lot of time with SBSD, DGS. Secretary Johnson has been very involved in this. We have a long history of doing disparity studies and then not doing anything about it. And this is our opportunity to do it. As Senator Mason just said a second ago, I've got about a 10-month runway here, and I'm willing to spend all summer on this to get it right and work with all of the stakeholders to do that. And I know I speak for SBSD, and I know I speak for Secretary Johnson and DGS. We have high performers in many parts of our state government in this space already, and there are areas where we can do a lot better, as the disparity study showed. So I would urge you to approve this measure without a general delayed enactment provision. The one thing I will say is everybody thinks this bill is a great idea, but nobody wants it to apply to them. And this calls the question, and we have just not the measures that we've done historically have just not gotten the job done.
Mr. Chairman. Number one, I'd suggest that's because a study is not what we need. We need a collaboration of how to do it. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to amend my amendment to be January 1, 2022.
All right.
Accept that.
All right. It would be, so the amendment is amended to change the date from July 1, 2022 to January 1.
To give that whole summer time to get that done.
More time to be able to work out all these issues and everything.
Mr. Chairman, and the patron and Secretary Ball's reaction to January 1 versus July 1?
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, unfortunately, it's just human nature. When we walk out of these doors, when this session is over, life goes back to where it always has been. The bill, the parts of the bill have been with us for years. We've been living under it. No one has said a word. And that's what I'm afraid of. We leave and that's it with the bill. We say all this stuff that we're going to get together, we're going to talk it all out. I think that we can, once we have a bill, that's when all the stakeholders will come back together and say, okay, can we make an amendment? Can we do this? But right now we got to have a bill to fix. We won't have anything to fix if this bill doesn't pass.
Well, this would, I don't think the intent is to have the bill not pass. I think it is to have it be delayed as to when all the aspects of the bill would be effective there. And we're going to have the administration and the stakeholders and everybody else involved during the year, regardless of whether the date of implementation of effectiveness of the legislation is July 1 or January 1. And it would be done, it's not putting a reenactment clause on to say that you would need something else. So, Secretary Ball, do you want to comment any further?
Just to say, I agree with Delegate Ward, Chairman Barker. This bill passing will get us sharply focused. I have 10 months left in this position, and I have made I know many of you. I've known many of you for many, many years, and I will do my utmost to get this right as much as humanly possible during the next several months. But I would ask you all to move forward with the measure with the proposed amendments that Senator Mason has outlined.
Mr. Chair?
All right.
Senator Boysko here.
Senator Boysko.
My understanding is that we're going to be stuck, like in the working group, and if we were to give it the full year, we would have all the pieces in place, and then it would be enacted, and actually, the providers would be required to, they would understand what they were expected to do. I'm struggling to understand why putting it off 6 months is such a problem, with all due respect. And I hate to cause problems, but I'm not understanding why a 6-month delay in the enactment if we're going to do the work, and we're committed to doing the work leading up to that.
All right. Anybody else want to comment?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Donovan.
I'll just say, we've heard multiple times, this is already in place by executive order. The issue that we have are small businesses that feel they have not been heard or had a chance to speak to the administration who's anxious to move forward with the changes and making it work. What we can do best to serve Virginia is make sure all those entities get together and talk. This is not a reenactment clause. This is a delayed enactment clause, because that sets the expectation that everybody has to do the work so that it can get, and it gives a reasonable date by which that work can be done. So I will close with that, but I hope this committee will see fit to support the delayed enactment to January 1, 22.
All right. If there's no further discussion, we will vote on the amendment to delay the effective date of the legislation to January 1 of 2022 for 6 months. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. All right, the ayes have that. You want to do a recorded vote? Okay, we'll do a recorded vote on that then. So.
Ayes 8, noes 6, 1 abstention.
All right, ayes 8, noes 6, 1 abstention. That passes.
So, Mr. Chairman, I move to report the bill as amended.
All right, and now we have a motion to report the bill as amended. All right, we have a motion and a second to report the bill as amended. Is there any further discussion? All right, we will vote on the board on the motion.
Ayes 9, noes 6.
All right, ayes 9, noes 6. All right.
Thank you.
If there's
Thank
no
you,
other
Mr.
business.
Chair. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, as well.
All right. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.